Hmm. Hmm. Welcome. Here we are. Here we are. Today is Thursday, August 26th. It is 12:18 p.m. where I sit on the west coast of Northern California. Sun is starting to come out. We're having these beautiful sort of foggy mornings that are I get to wear my like cozy shawl, and I really love fall time. So that's where we are in the northern hemisphere, at least here on the west coast. But as I see those of you joining, welcome, 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 and just recognizing that you may very well be at a similar time zone, or this may be late afternoon, evening for you. And if you feel inspired to, I actually always love to see where people are joining from. So if you want to put your location in the comments, just so I can get a sense of where we are in this global web of connection, kind of joining each other in some virtual space that both exists and doesn't exist at the same time, sort of magical, miraculous, and disorienting all at the same time. So, I've talked about this before, this idea that, on my website, actually, the tagline is come home to go big. And it really came from years ago. It must have been, I don't know, 6 or more years ago, but I saw that phrase again. Somebody said, go big or go home. And I was like, I hate that phrase. And so I did some work just around teasing out, like, well, what is it? First of all, what is rubbing me the wrong way about that sort of phrase? And then I really want to talk about what do I mean by come home to go big. And I want to tease apart all the pieces of this and hopefully make it practical. Hopefully make it practical. So first of all, why I don't like go big or go home. And the first is that it is generally, even though it's often said just sort of off the cuff, and it's not, it doesn't necessarily need to be so like big and serious. It's often said in sort of a punishing way. The idea is like, well, go big or go home, like go big or get out of here, Um, and I dislike things that come from this sense that there's like a bit of a punishment. Like if you don't do it right, if you don't go big enough, right? Go big or go home. If you don't go big enough, whoever the speaker is or whatever the overculture is or whatever ideas we have in our own mind, like if it's not big enough to meet that, then you're sent home. And it's like being sent to the principal's office or something. And I remember my first sort of reaction to this was also like, wait a minute, I love my home. Like, first of all, it's not a punishment. So why are you saying it like it is? It's sort of, when the distinction between like FOMO and JOMO was made, right? Like fear of missing out and then like the joy of missing out. And there's sort of like this punishing sense of like, go home, rather than, oh, you get to go home. I get to go home to this place that I love being. And in some way that holds, like, I do really love my home. But this idea, like, I would hope that everybody would love their home. Like, may we all create some sort of beautiful home that we actually would love being in. And there's nowhere else we would really rather be. So I dislike sort of the punishing nature of it. And then I dislike sort of built into there this idea that there's some judgment around what is big, right? Go big. What is big? And this often also, there's a thread that weaves through this that's often about, quote unquote, playing small. And I just really dislike that. What I really would orient people towards instead, which is actually much more of like a somatic experience, which is like, what is right sized? What is Kendra sized? Or you, whoever, all of those of you who might be listening live or watching the replay, what is it actually to invite yourself into a me sized space in the world? Which means that I'm neither attempting to be, to take up less space, be less loud, have less joy, be less physically sized than whatever all these things are, that I'm neither attempting because we cannot take up less space than we do. Even in our attempts, we're literally taking up our own space. And so it's an attempt, right? We say playing small or I make myself small, but we actually can't. We're always our size, but what is it actually to rest inside that rather than attempting to take up less space in some form, energetic, verbal or auditory, physical, emotional, all the different realms that we can take up space. But also, what is it to take up my space rather than attempting to take up more space than is actually not correct, like correct for other people or correct in the world or acceptable or okay, but like, oh no, right now, this is my right space. This is my right physical space. You might be in a conversation and there could be this idea of like play big in this conversation. And it is true that sometimes, like in a conversation or a negotiation or something, there's a place to lean in to take up our actual right size, which is, oh, I have something to say, and it would be correct sized for me to say it rather than withhold it. But there's also like this idea of like, I have to push myself in to take up more space. You should take up more space in the world. And that's like the go big at all costs. You know what goes big or goes home is cancer. And I just really think like we each individually and then humans, that there's this place that's neither like playing small nor playing big, but playing correct size. Like where actually do we individually as unique human beings and then also humans as a species, like what is our right place in the ecosystem? And that's a really individual question, but it's a very different perspective to come from individually. What is a Kendra sized shape in the world? And where are times that I attempt to puff up and take up more than my Kendra size space? And what are places where I attempt, to pretzel myself or shrink and take up less than what is just Kendra sized? So I dislike sort of the punishing quality, and I dislike this idea that big is a thing that anybody could, like anybody, even including my own self, could judge, like, is this big enough? Rather than like, is it correct sized? And certainly that anybody outside of myself could ever be like, oh, you're playing small or go big. Like this is what going big is. Like nobody gets to tell you that. And in some ways, like part of what I'm saying is like, even you, like I think so many of us have internalized these so that we have these ideas like my dreams aren't big enough, my life isn't big enough, my aspirations aren't big enough, that the things I want to create, they're not big enough, rather than like, well, are they correct sized for me? And not correct again as in like right or what is possible or what other people think is okay, but like, oh, the actual being that I am, this is the life, this is the life that I long for. And that's the only measure of whether it's big enough or good enough or right sized for you. And there are people who, dream of speaking on stage in front of thousands of people, and that's correct sized. And then if we measure ourselves against that, like, oh, I should dream bigger. Maybe you're a person like, I love teaching groups of 6 in person, but I should dream bigger. That's probably me just limiting myself, rather than no, that's my career. Like I love that. That is where I shine. That is correct size. That feels good to me. Not just good like, oh, I'm safe. And actually I have other dreams, but they feel unsafe. But it just is like, this is the size that I love. This is where I want to live. Right? Like for me, in my home, do I want a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 2-story home with 10 acres and all of this needs to be clean and tended to? No. And even right, because then some people will come in and be like, oh well, what if you had help? Like you could have staff, dream bigger and go and create the money to like have that big house. Like actually you want the house, you just don't want to do the work, so dream bigger so that you can have all the staff to take care of it. And if I imagine living in that and I have people like coming and cleaning my house every day and tending the land, like for me, again, I don't want to say for any of you that actually might be your correct. You're like, yes, I would like that. I want an ecosystem. I want to provide those jobs for people. Like that is correct size. That actually is not correct size for me. Correct size is like a little bit bigger than the house I live in. Right? This is where we go like, oh, I don't necessarily need to go like, I guess this is good enough and I won't long for anything other than what I have. But correct size actually isn't like a mansion, or it isn't 10 acres, or it isn't, it's like, no, 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 actually, you know what is correct sized is this. And that feels like, oh yes, this is where I sit in my own seat. And I'm neither sort of like collapsing into myself or attempting to want less or be smaller than I am, but neither am I sort of have left my seat and I'm falling forward into dreams or visions or aspirations that actually were fed to me somewhere, family of origin, culture of origin, community that I happen to be in now, something that I see that somebody else has that they look happy. So maybe I should have that thing so that I'm happy too. And really, this is where I bridge into why I like to say come home to go big, is that we take all that and we like it's like an inhalation and exhalation, right? Like inhale it and bring it all back to like, oh wait, actually inside my own spot, my right size space, the space of my skin and my energy and the seat that I actually sit on, the one that I reside on. And without attempting to be smaller, but also sort of without leaning forward into things. If I actually stay in my own space, if I come home to the truth of my being, then what do I want? What is actually right in front of me? And what do I actually want? And when we actually come home to ourselves, by which I mean we come home to our own, to some extent, it's our own thoughts and feelings, which actually requires a lot of space and quiet. So much input. And it can come from other people, it can come from social media, it can come from the news, it can just come in so many forms, right? This external, there's input, 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 to the point that I find that many, if not most people, it really don't know what they think, and I would actually challenge most of us, myself included, honestly, to go like, okay, do I really think and feel that? Or is this some response, something I've taken on, or some reaction to like input? And so creating that kind of actual quiet space, actual space for just what is it to be inside our own minds. And when it's quiet, so we start to notice like what is just rattling around, that's like, someone threw a tin can inside our own mind and it's kind of rattling around in there, still making noise. And like, oh, well, what if we take that out? Like then what actually is in my own, my own mind, my own emotions, my own heart. People talk a lot about intuition or trusting your gut. But the truth is, again, like following our heart or our inner wisdom or trusting our gut or our intuition, so much of that is related to emotions and how we feel. And our emotions and how we feel are impacted by input. And we all know this. We think about cognitive bias. And we think it's just cognitive bias, but actually it's thoughts that we make up about how we feel, right? So our feeling gets hooked by something and then we make up thoughts about it. And that's cognitive bias, to make it make sense. Like, that's why that's right. Yes, I agree with that because that's how I feel when when I see it or I read it or I hear that person say it. And so that kind of time where we actually eliminate input to the best of our ability, be with our own thoughts, journaling. Yes, meditation, but I think even more than like specific meditative practices often is that space of like truly just the emptying and the being in more quiet and more space, and eliminating input and finding out what is even there when I'm not always inputting. And we have so much input that we do now that's sort of supposedly, good or positive, right? This is go big or go home. It's like I should be listening to podcasts all the time. I should be learning. I should always be, growing, rather than what is it when I like what actually happens when I come home to myself and I'm just with me. Just with me. And inside of that, there is some piece of also like, what is our home? Like, where do we come back to that holds us? That, so there is the importance of just my space, just quiet, just being with my own mind, just being with my own heart, and just listening to find out what is even here. But there is also that sense of what is it actually to come home, could be like to community or family, that space that actually we can fully let go and let down, let the sigh out, where we feel completely free or relaxed. We feel completely relaxed to be ourselves, and even to find out who ourselves is when we are relaxed. Because we can have ideas like, well, I think I'm this kind of person, and do I feel relaxed to be that around these people? But we're already coming in with this idea of like who I am and can I be that here, rather than where are those spaces where actually we can relax and discover who we are. We can discover who we are in a place of quiet and relaxation. So the saying, go big or go home, often leads us to imagine that there's some life outside of the one that we already have that's better. And this, again, this is this seemingly opposing ideas, which is it's different than just be satisfied with exactly what you have and don't ever dream about anything beyond that. That's sort of all the way one end of the pole. And then the other is this sort of constant nagging energetic sensation that there is some life other than the one we're having that's better than the one we're having. And I think it's more that energetic sort of habit, that energetic habit of leaving ourselves, of energetically jumping ahead, of sort of thinking, imagining, feeling, right? In the visceral feeling sense, emotional feeling sense, that there's some other life than the one that we're living that we could be living. And that some other life than the one that we're living would be better than the life we're living. And I fundamentally disagree with that. And I also, again, this is like the seeming paradox. I don't actually believe it is a paradox, but it can feel like a tension point, is that simultaneously, I do not believe that there is a better life that I could be living, or a better life that you could be living, one that's more you, or bigger or better, or in which you will feel better. And anything, anything, I cannot stress this enough, anything that you want to shift in your life, or any place that there is a place that you want to be on the path towards, or make a gesture towards, or begin to expand into, or create differently in your life, begins 100% begins from exactly where you're sitting now. And so if energetically or in thought or in emotion or in some way you are habitually leaving yourself and trying to jump to a life you believe is bigger or better than the one you're in now, you actually can never fully create it until you fully draw back and inhabit the spot, the seat, the life, the body, the being, the family, the community, the being that you are now. And from that place is where we can take one step. And then from that place is where we take another step. And then from that place is where we actually reevaluate. We look around and we go, oh, now I'm here. Now what's actually the next step towards that which I most deeply long for? That which I am most deeply devoted to? How do I actually make a gesture or take a step towards that? And we only can do that from the exact place we are right now. So that requires coming home to our own being, coming home to our own heart, coming home to the actual place that we sit and live and reside, coming home to the actual circumstances of our life, coming home to our actual family, our actual community. And from that place, choosing and deciding what is the correct gesture, what is the right sized, what is the me step or the me gesture or the me sized, me shaped expression to move forward into the world or to bring into the world. And in my experience, and I've watched so many people do this, I mean, this is like a such a common story, right? Of people that leave themselves and they create what looks like external success. And then they get there and they look around and they don't know, like, who am I? And who is this person I'm married to? And what even is my family? And where are my real friends? And it's because that's been created in the space of leaving oneself. And then often those people, what they need to do is go back. They're like, oh, and then they had to completely dismantle their lives in order to find out who they were. So we think like, oh, the fast track to success is just like, just make the money or just get the house or just have the husband, the wife, the partner, have the kid, like get to the thing you think you want. But if what we have to do is then go back and retrace our steps to even find out, wait, who am I? Does the me that is truly here even want this dream that I thought I wanted? That is not more efficient. That is actually not, the fast track to success. That is like, oh, now I have to come all the way back and start at square one again and somehow build it out in the construct of everything that I've created around me, rather than right now, exactly who you are, exactly where you are, in exactly the life and family and community that you are in. Okay, from right here, what actually do I see as, like, what is working really well? What do I love? What actually is this is exactly the me shaped life that I want. This is the me sized dream that I want. Actually, this part is just perfect. And then there's a little something, but when I sit fully in my seat, I can start to see, oh, this is actually the correct step. I don't need to take one big leap here. I don't need to try to cross an entire river or end up in a new city or, dismantle my life. Oh, there's actually just this very slight shift in orientation. And I can tell right from this spot so clearly exactly where to go next. And from that place, this is the beauty of come home to go big. There's probably, I think I wrote something down here that actually is about, like, rather than the come home to go big, but it's something around, come home to go full, but it's not as catchy, right? But from right here, the beauty is that not only will your life actually be and feel big all the time, like every moment when we're actually here becomes so much more full, so much more alive, so much more actually full of everything that we most want and hope and dream for. And from the spot that we are actually in, we have so much more power to make a gesture or to create or to slightly shift and orient in the direction that we most deeply want in any given moment. My partner and I were just this morning talking about how wonderful it is to see our daughter delight in things. And I was reminded of this moment probably a little over a year ago. So it was kind of like right in the middle of shelter in place in 2020. And we're in the United States. Just everything that was happening in the summer of 2020 in the United States. And it was a heavy time culturally and for a lot of people I know. And I definitely felt it and my partner felt it. And it was like this. And I was feeling very like, oh man, it's like a heavy time. And my daughter, my kids were home all the time because schools were closed at that time in 2020. And this whole, it was just, and we just couldn't have childcare, right? There was all these limitations. And she comes up to me and she's just like, her face is like this. And she's like, Mama. And I'm like, what? She goes, Mama, I almost forgot that spit bugs existed. And I was like, oh, that, right in that moment, like what a big life my daughter was living. And so in some way, of course, we can go like, well, she's 8. And so that's exciting. But actually that is actually available to each of us in every moment when we fully inhabit ourselves in the moment and the space that we actually are. We have the opportunity to realize how big our life actually is in this moment. And at the same time, simultaneously, we are better equipped. We will have a better roadmap for any place that we would actually like to go slightly differently than the life that we're living right now. And that's why I say over and over and over, come home to go big. And these practices of coming home to yourself, and that it is equally important to have people or to have community or to have spaces that support you and guide you and hold you in coming home in a way that has you relax, such that you can actually discover who you are, what you're most deeply devoted to, and what is the truth of big for you? What is the truth of right sized, correct sized for the actual being that you are in your life? So there's my Sunday sermon on a Thursday. I hope it's supportive. Sending you much love. Ciao.